Their gazes locked in a long, fascinated stare. And then to Leo's surprise, Catherine smiled at him. A sweet, natural, brilliant smile, the first she had ever given him. Leo felt his chest tighten, and he went hot all over, as if some euphoric drug had gone straight to his nervous system. It felt like happiness. He remembered happiness from a long time ago. He didn't want to feel it. And yet the giddy warmth kept washing over him for no reason whatsoever. "Thank you," Catherine said, the smile still hovering on her lips. "That is kind of you, my lord. But I will never dance with you." Which, of course, made it the goal of Leo's life. Catherine turned to retrieve a sketchbook and roll of pencils from the saddle pouch. "I didn't know you sketched," Leo said. "I'm not very good at it." He gestured to the book in her hands. "May I see that and give you reason to mock me?" "I won't. My solemn promise." "Let me see." Slowly Leo extended his hand, palm up. Catherine glanced at his open hand, and then his face. Hesitantly she gave the book to him. Opening the book, he glanced through the sketches. There was a series of the ruins from different angles, perhaps too careful and disciplined in places where a bit of looseness would have given the sketch more vitality. But on the whole it was very well done. "Lovely," he said. "You have a nice feeling for line and form." She colored, seeming uncomfortable with the praise. "I understand from your sisters that you are an accomplished artist." "Competent, perhaps. My architectural training included a number of art classes." Leo gave her a casual grin. "I'm especially good at sketching things that stay still for long periods of time. Buildings. Lampposts." He leafed through the book. "Do you have any of Beatrix's drawings?" "On the last page," Catherine said. She began to sketch a protruding section of the wall, over there, but she became preoccupied with a squirrel that kept hopping into the foreground. Leo found a perfectly rendered and detailed portrait of a squirrel. He shook his head. "Beatrix and her animals." They exchanged a grin. "Many people talk to their pets," Catherine said. "Yes, but very few understand the replies." Closing the sketchbook, Leo gave it back to her and began to walk the perimeter of the manor enclosure. Catherine followed, picking her way among the gorse studded with yellow flowers and shiny black pods. "How deep was the original moat, do you estimate?" "I would guess no more than 8 feet where it cuts into the higher ground." Leo shielded his eyes as he surveyed their surroundings. "They must have diverted one of the streams to fill it. You see those mounds over there? They were probably farm buildings and serf quarters, made of clay and stud." "What was the manor home like?" "The central keep was almost certainly made of stone, with the rest a combination of materials. And it was likely crowded with sheep, goats, dogs, and serfs." "Do you know the history of the original overlord?" Catherine sat on a portion of the exposed wall and arranged her skirts. "You mean the first Viscount Ramsay?" Leo stopped at the edge of the circular depression that had once been the moat. His gaze traveled across the broken landscape. He started as Thomas of Blackmere, known for his lack of mercy. Apparently he had a talent for pillaging and burning villages. He was regarded as the left arm of Edward the Black Prince. Between them, they virtually destroyed the practice of chivalry. Glancing over his shoulder, he smiled at the sight of Catherine's wrinkled nose. She sat with schoolgirl straightness, the sketchbook in her lap. He would have liked to snatch her off the wall and do some pillaging of his own. Reflecting that it was a good thing she couldn't read his thoughts, he continued the story. After fighting in France and being held prisoner for 4 years, Thomas was released and returned to England. I suppose he thought it was time to settle down, because he subsequently rode on this keep, killed the baron who had built it, seized his lands and ravished his widow. Her eyes were wide. Poor lady. Leo shrugged. She must have had some influence on him. He married her afterward and sired 6 children by her. Did they live to a peaceful old age? Leo shook his head, approaching her leisurely. Thomas went back to France, where they put an end to him at Castellon. but the French were quite civilized about it and raised a monument to him on the field. I don't think he deserved any kind of tribute. Don't be too hard on the fellow, he was only doing what the times demanded. He was a barbarian, she said indignantly. Regardless of the times. The wind had teased a lock of light golden hair loose from her tight chignon, and sent it straying over her cheek. Unable to resist, Leo reached out and stroked the tendril back behind her ear. Her skin was baby fine and smooth. Most men are, he said. It's only that they have more rules now. He removed his hat, set it on the wall, and stared into her upturned face. You may put a man in a cravat, teach him manners, and make him attend a soiree, but hardly any of us are truly civilized. From what I know of men, she said, I agree. He gave her a mocking glance. What do you know of men? She looked solemn, the clear grey irises now tinged with ocean green. I know not to trust them. I would say the same of women. He shed his coat, tossed it over the wall, and went to the hill at the center of the ruins. Surveying the surrounding land, Leo couldn't help wondering if Thomas of Blackmere had stood on this exact spot, looking over his property. And now, centuries later, the estate was Leo's to make of what he would, his to shape and order. Everyone and everything on it was his responsibility. How is the view from up there? He heard Catherine's voice from below. Exceptional. Come see it, if you like. She left the sketchbook on the fence and began up the slope of the mound, lifting her skirts as she climbed. Turning to watch Catherine, Leo let his gaze linger on her slender, pretty figure. She was fortunate that medieval times were long past, he thought with a private smile, or she would have found herself snapped up and devoured by some marauding lord. But the touch of amusement faded quickly as he imagined the primitive satisfaction of claiming her, picking her up and carrying her to a soft patch of ground. For just a moment he let himself dwell on the idea, lowering himself to her writhing body, tearing her dress, kissing her breasts. Leo shook his head to clear it, troubled by the direction of his thoughts. Whatever else he was not a man to force himself on a woman. And yet the fantasy was too potent to ignore. With an effort, he bludgeoned the barbaric impulses back into submission. Catherine was halfway up the slope when she gave a low cry and seemed to stumble. Concerned, Leo started for her immediately. Did you trip? Are you bloody hell? He stopped in place as he saw that the ground had partially given way beneath her. Stop, Cat. Don't move. Wait. What's happening? She asked, her face bleached of color. Is it a sinkhole? More like a bloody architectural miracle. We seem to be standing on a portion of a roof that should have caved in at least 2 centuries ago. They were approximately 5 yards apart, with Leo on higher ground. Cat, he said with great care, slowly lower yourself to the ground to redistribute your weight over a greater surface. Easy. Yes, like that. Now you're going to crawl back down the slope. Can you help me? She asked, and the tremor in her voice wrenched his heart. He answered in a thick voice that didn't sound like his own. Sweetheart, I would love nothing more. But joining my weight to yours could collapse the roof entirely. Start moving. If it makes you feel better, with all the debris in there, it can't be too far to fall. Actually, that doesn't make me feel better at all. White-faced, she moved slowly on her hands and knees. Leo stayed in place, not taking his gaze from Catherine. The ground that seemed so solid beneath his feet was possibly nothing more than a layer of earth and ancient rotted timber. You'll be fine, he said in a soothing tone, while his heart pounded with anxiety for her. You weigh no more than a butterfly. It's my weight that's put a strain on what's left of the beams and bridging joints. Is that why you're not moving? Yes. If I cause a collapse when I try to get off, I'd like you to be out of harm's way first. They both felt the ground shift beneath them. My lord, Catherine asked, her eyes wide, do you think this has anything to do with the Ramsay curse? Actually, that hadn't occurred to me yet, Leo said. Thank you so much for bringing it to my attention. The roof collapsed, and they simultaneously plunged amid a torrent of earth. rock, and timber into the dark space below. Catherine stirred and coughed. There was grit in her mouth and eyes, and she was sprawled on a wretchedly uncomfortable surface. "Marks!" She heard Leo shove debris aside as he made his way to her. His voice was unsteady and urgent. "Are you hurt? Can you move?" "Yes, I'm all in one piece." She sat up and rubbed her face. Evaluating the collection of aches and pains in her body, she decided they were all insignificant. Just a bit bruised. "Oh, dear. My spectacles are gone." She heard him swear. "I'll try to find them." Disoriented, she tried to make out what she could of their surroundings. Leo's lean form was a dark blur nearby as he searched the rubble. Dust clouded the air, settling slowly. From what little she could see, they were in a pit, perhaps 6 feet deep, with sunlight drizzling in through the broken roof. "You were right, my lord. It wasn't far to fall. Is this the keep?" Leo's breathing sounded strained as he replied, "I'm not sure. It could be an undercroft beneath the keep. I see the remains of a stone partition over there, and hollows in the side wall where transverse joints would support." In a burst of fresh terror, Catherine launched herself at his indistinct form, scrabbling to reach him in the dimness. "What is it?" Leo's arms closed around her. Gasping, she buried her face against the solid surface of his chest. They were half sitting, half lying amid heaps of rotted timber, stone, and earth. One of his hands came to her head, curving over her skull protectively. "What happened?" Her voice was muffled in his shirt. Undercroft. He smoothed her hair and pressed her even closer into the protection of his body. "Yes. Why does that frighten you?" She could hardly speak between panting breaths. "Isn't that where they keep the bodies?" The tremulous question hung in the air as Leo puzzled over it. "Oh. No, it's not that kind of undercroft." A quiver of rueful amusement ran through his voice, and she felt his mouth touch the rim of her ear. "You're thinking of one of the rooms beneath modern churches, where the deceased are put away. But a medieval undercroft is different. It's only a storeroom beneath the keep." Catherine didn't move. "There are no skeletons in here?" "No. Nor skulls, nor coffins." His hand continued to stroke tenderly over her hair. "Poor darling. It's all right. Nothing fearsome down here. Take a deep breath. You're safe." Catherine continued to lie in his arms as she caught her breath. She tried to take in the fact that Leo, her enemy and tormentor, was calling her poor darling and petting her. His lips brushed her temple and lingered gently. Holding still, she absorbed the sensation. She had never been attracted to men of his size, preferring those of less intimidating stature. But he was strong and comforting, and he seemed so genuinely concerned, and his voice was like dark velvet wrapping around her. How perplexing. Had anyone told her that she would one day be trapped alone in a filthy pit with Leo, Lord Ramsay, she would have said that was her worst nightmare. And yet it was turning out to be a rather agreeable experience. No wonder Ramsay was so sought after by the ladies of London. If this was how he set about seducing them, all this lovely soothing and stroking, Catherine could easily understand how he got his way with them. To her regret, he gently eased her away from him. "Marks, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to find your spectacles in this wreckage." "I have another pair at home," she ventured. "Thank God." Leo sat up with a quiet grunt of discomfort. "Now, if we stand on the highest pile of debris, it's only a short distance to the surface. I'm going to hoist you up, get you out of here, and then you're going to ride back to Ramsay House. Can train the horse, so you won't need to guide him. He'll find his way back home with no trouble." "What are you going to do?" she asked, bewildered. He sounded rather sheepish. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to wait here until you send someone for me." "Why?" "I have a..." He paused, searching for a word. "Splinter." She felt indignant. "You're going to make me ride back alone and unescorted and virtually blind, to send someone to rescue you? All because you have a splinter?" "A large one," he volunteered. "Where is it? Your finger? Your hand? Maybe I can help too." "Oh, God. This last as he took her hand and brought it to his shoulder. His shirt was wet with blood, and a thick shard of timber protruded from his shoulder. "That's not a splinter," she said in horror. "You've been impaled. What can I do? Shall I pull it out?" "No, it might be lodged against an artery. And I wouldn't care to bleed out down here." She crawled closer to him, bringing her face close to his to examine him anxiously. Even in the shadows, he appeared pale and gray, and when she pressed her fingers to his forehead, she felt cool moisture. "Don't worry," he murmured. "It looks worse than it is." But Catherine didn't agree. If anything, it was worse than it looked. She was infused with panic as she wondered if he were going into shock, a condition in which the heart did not pump enough blood to maintain the body. It had been described as a momentary pause in the act of death. Stripping off her riding coat, she tried to lay it over his chest. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Trying to keep you warm." Leo plucked the garment off his chest and made a scoffing sound. "Don't be ridiculous. First, the injury isn't that bad. Second, this tiny thing is not capable of keeping any part of me warm. Now, about my plan." "It is obviously a significant injury," she said, "and I do not agree to your plan. I have a better one." "Of course you do," he replied sardonically. "Marks, for once would you do as I ask?" "No, I'm not going to leave you here. I'm going to pile up enough debris for both of us to climb out." "You can't even see, damn it. And you can't move these timbers and stones. You're too small." "There is no need to make derogatory remarks about my stature," she said, lurching upward and squinting at her surroundings. Identifying the highest pile of debris, she made her way to it and hunted for nearby rocks. "I'm not being derogatory." He sounded exasperated. "Your stature is absolutely perfect for my favorite activity. But you're not built for hauling rocks. Blast it, Marks, you're going to hurt yourself." "Stay there," Catherine said sharply, hearing him push some heavy object aside. "You'll worsen your injury, and then it will be even more difficult to get you out. Let me do the work." Finding a heap of ashlar blocks, she picked one up and lugged it up the pile, trying not to trip over her own skirts. "You're not strong enough," Leo said, sounding aggravated and out of breath. "What I lack in physical strength," she replied, going for another block, "I make up for in determination." How inspiring. Could we set aside the heroic fortitude for one bloody moment and dredge up some common sense? "I'm not going to argue with you, my lord. I need to save my breath." For she paused to heft another block, stacking rocks. Somewhere amid the ordeal, Leo decided hazily that he would never underestimate Catherine Marks again. Ounce for ounce, she was the most insanely obstinate person he had ever known, dragging rocks and debris while half-blind and hampered by long skirts, diligently crossing back and forth across his vision like an industrious mole. She had decided to build a mound upon which they could climb out, and nothing would stop her. Occasionally she stopped and put her hand on his forehead or throat, checking his temperature and pulse. And then she would be off again. It was maddening not to be able to help her, humiliating to let a woman do such work without him, but every time he tried to stand, he became dizzy and disoriented. His shoulder was on fire, and he couldn't use his left arm properly. Cold sweat dripped from his face and stung his eyes. He must have drifted off for a few minutes, because the next thing he was aware of was Catherine's urgent hands shaking him awake. Advertisement dash. "Marks," he said groggily. "What are you doing here?" He had the confused impression that it was morning, and she wanted him to awaken before his usual hour. "Don't sleep," she said with an anxious frown. "I've built the pile high enough that we can climb out now. Come with me." His body felt as if it had been encased in lead. He was overwhelmed with weariness. "In few minutes. Let me doze a bit longer."